Good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm on cue here, but maybe not. Should I begin?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to all of you. My name is David Crombie, and it's my pleasure to be your host for this inaugural edition of the Speaker's Corner. First of all, let me introduce my guests. Ken Greenberg is an urban designer, a city building and rejuvenating cities, and for restoring their vitality and sustainability. Ken was awarded his efforts and became a member of the Order of Canada last year. Architect Shirley Blumberg is also a member of the Order of Canada and is recognized for her outstanding contributions to architecture and her commitment to create spaces that foster a sense of community. Anne Bell is the Director of Conservation and Education at Ontario Nature and is well known for her contributions to the stewardship of Ontario's natural heritage. And Suzanne Kavanagh is a community activist who advocates for heritage conservation, strong communities, and affordable housing. And she's a former president of the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. Our topic this evening, as you know, is the call of heritage, cultural heritage, built heritage, and natural heritage. These great gifts from the past have always been important to our understanding of who we are, where we might want to go, and where we have been. Today, however, there is a growing concern that these legacies and endowments are being discounted, undermined, and directly attacked. These concerns will be the focus of tonight's Speaker's Corner. I will now call on Ken Greenberg, who will offer his thoughts and help us frame our discussion tonight. But before I do, I want to remind you that there will be a question and answer period at the latter part of the program. So if you have any questions for any of us, I urge you to use the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And now it's over to you, Ken.
Thank you very much, David. A pleasure to be with all of you this evening. We find ourselves in a place that I didn't think we would have thought possible, and that is having to make this kind of defense of heritage. We thought we had, in fact, fought these battles decades ago and were in a relatively safe position, but apparently not. So to introduce it, I'm gonna be doing a setup with 4 examples: mid-20th century heritage represented by Ontario Place, early 20th century heritage represented by the Dominion Foundries, and in terms of natural heritage, the Greenbelt, which we thought was well and adequately protected, and a more recent instance of a wetlands in Pickering. Next. So I think as we've come to understand, cities are perpetually unfinished. They continually reinvent themselves. And when they do so, they leave traces, palimpsests, found objects of past lives. And these, we have long understood, have tremendous inherited value. In the case of built heritage, embodied energy. They carry cultural memories. They provide richness and diversity to our cities. And you see 3 images of Toronto going through its various stages to illustrate the point. And now we can no longer apparently take for granted that those values are recognized. Next. So the first example I'm going to talk about is that mid-20th century heritage represented by Ontario Place, a creation of 2 of our most important designers, Everhard Zeidler and landscape architect Michael Huff, created in around 1970. The next slide. So this is a sketch that Zeidler did at the time Ontario Place, as we know, was inspired by Canada's great success with Expo 67 in Montreal. And he referred to it as urban parkland. This set of remarkable artificial islands portrayed here, which provide a whole range of uses and express kind of the exuberance of that moment for Toronto and for the province of Ontario at that time. Next. Astonishingly, in 2018, the province of Ontario dissolved the Ontario Place Board, and the Minister Tabulo, went down to the site and made the comment you see in red. The current state of Ontario Place is disgraceful, and there is nothing that can be saved. We need to turn it into a world-class attraction. Nothing is off the table, and the site will become more of an amusement destination than a waterfront one. Now, included to everything that was on the table were the extraordinary structures, the pods, the Cinesphere that Eb Zeidler had created, that remarkable landscape created by Michael Huff, and even the more recent Trillium Park with the William G. Davis Trail, named after the prime minister from that, or the premier from that very same government who opened Ontario Place in 1971. Next. So this immediately produced a strong reaction. A group called Ontario Place for All, with Suzanne, Kavanagh, and I, and a number of other people are members of, came to the defense of Ontario Place, and then more recently joined by the World Monuments Fund. And so these are the two websites where you can connect with these groups. Literally thousands of people, not only from our area, but from across Ontario, and indeed around the world, have come to the defense of Ontario Place. Next. Ontario Place for All actually commissioned a really interesting study from the New York firm of financial analysts, HR&A, specialists in the value of public space. And they produced a short study which pointed out that even if all you cared about was the bottom line, if that was your only interest, Ontario Place as a public place has much greater value, inherent value, and delivers a greater value in terms of return on investment to the province, the city, and the country as a public place than as a kind of amusement destination or theme park. Next. But perhaps even more important, in the time of COVID, what we have seen is how valuable this is as a resource for us as an extraordinary public park. And even this past weekend, my wife Etty and I had occasion to go to Ontario Place and literally see the hundreds and hundreds of people who were seeking refuge, seeking a place of respite from the experience that we're all going through in Ontario Place, and in fact, using it even in its somewhat neglected state as this wonderful public park. Next. So Ontario Place actually has been the subject of an international ideas competition, the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario, the Daniels Faculty of Architectural Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto, and the World Monuments Fund issued a call. Respondents from all over the world actually provided their submissions. Next. This is the scheme that actually was awarded the first prize. And what's interesting about this is it shows a band of park linking Ontario Place and Exhibition Place, crossing over Lakeshore Boulevard, an extension of Ontario Place, and very sensibly development up around the GO station, where the new Ontario line is also coming, where the 509 streetcar lands, and forming an opportunity to support this great public space, but also generate revenue. Next. Second example, the Dominion Foundries. On January 14th, all of a sudden, out of the blue, a demolition crew showed up on the site with no notice, and as you see here, started hacking away at these buildings to the astonishment of the public and people who lived in the West Don lands who were immediately adjacent to this scene. Next. So immediately, the Friends of the Foundry came into existence and was formed to defend these irreplaceable assets from 1917, 1929, the two great buildings on the site. You can see politicians from all three orders of government in the lower image who came to speak to defense. And on the upper right, the remarkable interior, which was used for the opening of the Pan Am Games. So the fact that without any notice, the province had assumed that in order to honor a deal it had made secretly with a developer to provide housing on this site, the buildings had to be demolished and they had to make tabula rasa of the site. Was extraordinary. Next. So we formed a group and I suggested my colleague Shirley Blumberg, who's going to talk in more detail about what could be done to both preserve the heritage, provide a substantial amount of housing, including a generous accommodation of affordable housing, and at the same time, produce some great public spaces. So Shirley will speak more to that. Next. So finally, natural heritage, which has come under, again, somewhat astonishingly, the same kind of threat. So this is an image which I love, which David Crombie used when he formed the Waterfront Regeneration Trust and pointed out to all of us that the Toronto waterfront was not just a narrow band of land along the Lake Ontario shoreline, but in fact extended all the way up to the Oak Ridges Moraine, the height of land between Lake Ontario and Lake Simcoe, where our waters were recharged, the drinking water that we drink, and all the watersheds which came down to feed Lake Ontario. And in fact, this invaluable natural heritage made all of this entire area, in a sense, a waterfront site. Next. So again, remarkable thing happened. All of a sudden, we learned that a wetland, a valuable wetland in Pickering, was going to become, through an MZO, a ministerial order, an Amazon warehouse. And so this is actually a good news story. The first thing that happened with the extraordinary public reaction was that Amazon pulled out. Next. The next thing was the Pickering mayor sensibly calls for a pause on the development of this wetland once it was clear that the Amazon deal fell through. Next. Then the property developer who owned the land, who had made this deal with Amazon, in fact, canceled plans to develop the site. And next. And then finally, Pickering itself, the municipal government, has asked the province to revoke the MZO. So one more case where the public has stepped up and where we had a hasty retreat, and in fact, this wetlands will be saved. Next. But we're still faced with the threat of the so-called West GTA Highway 413, which will run right through the Greenbelt, essentially threatening thousands of acres of the Greenbelt. The Toronto Star did an extraordinary piece of investigative journalism this past week, which I would recommend to everybody, which pointed out all of the strange deals that lay behind this move of the provincial government. Next. But again, what's fascinating is that one after another, the municipalities along this route have withdrawn their support. So Vaughan did so. Next. So has the other municipalities. And now what's fascinating is that in the latest budget, no money was put aside by the provincial government for the building of this highway. And in fact, there may be an admission on the part of the government that this is not a done deal. Next. So I think what all these examples are pointing to is that there is a tremendous need for reliable, ongoing community stewardship of our built natural and cultural heritage that needs to step up consistently and persistently when needed, that transcends single political administrations and short-term, short-sighted calculations. So that's really the setup I would like to offer. And now, David, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, Ken. That frames the issues beautifully. Really appreciate it. I'm now going to ask Shirley if she'd like to pick up where Ken left off and offer her thoughts as well.
Thank you, David. Thanks, Mariah. Good evening. Thank you all for joining us. As we all know, Toronto is a city of neighborhoods, and we're fortunate that in such a diverse city, each neighborhood has its own identity. The question is, how do we create vibrant neighborhoods that are socially and environmentally sustainable? Neighborhoods that have distinctive character. That's where heritage comes in. Like Ken, I truly believe that the best neighborhoods build on what is there, which is our natural, cultural, and built heritage. It is never a tabula rasa. City building is an evolution, a palimpsest, a narrative that evolves with each generation. James Throgmorton, who is a professor at the School of Planning and Public Affairs at the University of Iowa, put it quite well. He said, planning is persuasive storytelling about the future. We're not just building residential buildings, we're building neighborhoods, we're building community, we're building future heritage. And this has to be done in collaboration with local communities. There is a quote by Jane Jacobs that I think that captures this really well. She said, cities have the capability of providing something for everybody only because and only when they're created by everybody. Next, please, Mariah. So tonight, as Ken said, I'm going to talk about the Dominion Foundry demonstration design concept that we did in collaboration with Ken and the Friends of the Foundry. And this was in response to the provincial government's MZO and the demolition that occurred on January 14th, which brought to light the fact that the government appears to have done a secret deal with the developer who is proposing to build 3 towers, 1 43 stories, 1 34 stories condos, and an 18-story affordable housing building, well over 1,000 units, which is it's a huge amount of density on the site. Next, please. So the site, as you know, is in West Donlands, and I think West Donlands is really interesting because it has become, I think, a really good example of a relatively new neighborhood. It has mid-density in the main. It takes its character from the Distillery district in terms of a very extensive public realm and a network of pathways, pedestrian pathways. And it tends to build the higher density on the periphery. So what we did is we looked at the site, which is 2.3 acres. And what we realized is that we could actually build 3 buildings, new buildings. We could retain the 2 most valuable heritage buildings. The first is the Foundry, which upon inspection is not irretrievably damaged by the demolition crew. It's all quite salvageable. So that's a very important building on the northwest corner, and also the machine shop, which is a very, very important building. What our idea was to have the highest residential tower closest to city, sorry, I've forgotten the name of this again, to the buildings to the northeast, where the higher 30-story buildings are. And then as we head to the west, we have a 20-story building, and then it rotates down to the south, in the southwest corner, with a 12-story slab. We're also planning to take the existing pedestrian routes through the site and to create public gathering spaces for people. Next, please. So this is, of course, the Front Street Boulevard, which is at the heart of the West Donlands. And as Ken had shown, this is the Foundry building and the on the top right, machine shop, which has a really beautiful interior, again, as Ken mentioned. Next, please. So this is the historic Distillery District. And what I think is quite remarkable is the way in which this has been developed by different developers. They have pretty well, all of them have consulted with the local community groups, the West Donlands Committee and the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association. All of them have provided pretty well 30% of the units as affordable housing. That seems to be the standard. And what is really great too is they've extended this particular, what is particularly characteristic of the Distillery District, which are these small public spaces and pathways, pedestrian and cycling pathways through their sites. So we get quite a fine grain of connected pedestrian networks. We also have beautiful new parks, Coketown Commons, and there's a new park also now just near Eastern Avenue. This is the site. Next, please. It is in the main mid-rise. These buildings just to the south of our site are 12-story buildings. Next, please. And here you can see a three-dimensional bird's eye view. You can see the scale of the residential buildings here. That's a park that's recently been developed just to the north. And what we show here is a 30-story building in the northeast, which is a similar height to the building that's existing east of that. 20 stories and then down to the 12-story slab. We've lifted the slab building up and it cantilevers over the machine shop. It was very, very important to us to keep the foundry and the machine shop as entire buildings in their entirety, so that they're not just facades, that they are very, they have their integrity preserved. And with the 20-story tower, it is just beside the foundry. And you can see one of the public spaces, which was very important. By lifting the slab building up, we get a public space at the southwest corner. Next, please. So this is a view of the existing foundry. And what we're doing is we're creating, we're reinstating glass on the south and adding it on the north. So we're animating Eastern Avenue as well. We're able to, this is the lifted 12-story building, which its expression really relates to the existing warehouses. And we did it out of the same brick as the existing machine shop. The underside, the soffit is mirrored so that actually it brings more light to the square and has a certain kind of kinetic liveliness to it. And then you see here, that is the 20-story building, which is in a kind of a light bronze metal. And then the building on the northeast, the tallest building, is in white. We have, together with the existing heritage buildings and the new podium for the tallest 30-story building, we have substantial area, about 120,000 square feet for retail and community use, which is huge in terms of amenity for the neighborhood. We're also able to bring about over 800 units to the site. So this is pretty close, but less than what the provincial government had suggested. And we did that on purpose. We felt we wanted to optimize what the maximum density could be, but still bring great public space to the site and also preserve heritage. Next, please. And then in the mid block is Foundry Lane. And then we have pathways connecting through to Eastern Avenue and to the south. This is looking back at the city. So on the left, you see the machine shop, and on the right, the new podium associated with the tallest tower. We also would like to continue the idea of the Distillery district in terms of its materiality with the brick paving. And we could see this could be a really wonderful space for the neighborhood for all kinds of events. So this was, it was really fantastic working with the whole group. And we were very pleased that we were able to demonstrate that you could bring, optimize the development possibility of a site, but still do it in a way that's in keeping with the neighborhood and brings a great deal of amenity for the neighborhood. Thank you. Back to you, David.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Shirley. I was very interested in seeing you go through all of that, because very often when these fights come from developers facing neighborhoods and so on, it's very much simply being against things. But your work and the work of the community showed that no, there are good alternatives that still create community and still preserve heritage in public spaces. So well done and thank you. Could I now ask Anne if you would talk to us a little bit about, heritage. Hello, Anne.
Hello there. Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight to talk about heritage and what we need to do to protect it. I'm joining you today from Toronto's West End in the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples, and the current territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. Since the very beginning, Indigenous peoples have inhabited these lands, which are still home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. In coming together to stand up for heritage, and in my case, for natural heritage in particular, it's so important, it's so critical to honor and show gratitude to the original peoples who've cared for this land since time immemorial. At the same time, we need to be mindful of broken covenants and the need to reconcile with all our relations. We need to commit ourselves to learning and healing so that together we may care for this land and for each other in peace and in friendship. We need to recognize and take up our responsibilities as future ancestors. And this is a term I've just come across recently, but I love it. We need to take up our responsibilities as future ancestors and be mindful of the generations to come. From a natural heritage perspective, we have so much to be grateful for in Toronto. Here we are, nestled on the shores of an absolutely spectacular freshwater lake in one of the most richly biodiverse regions of the country. Our rivers and ravines, our parks, our schoolyards, our city streets, all of these places contribute or could contribute to natural heritage that we have a responsibility to steward and to safeguard for all. Of course, as David and Ken and Shirley have pointed out, we have our work cut out for us. I work for Ontario Nature, a charitable conservation organization that protects wild species and wild spaces across Ontario through conservation, education, and public engagement. One of my roles at Ontario Nature is to promote and uphold strong environmental policy, particularly as it relates to natural heritage. For the most part, I focus on provincial policy, so as I'm sure you can appreciate, the past 2 years of environmental deregulation in Ontario have kept me and my colleagues very busy, much busier than we could have wished or imagined, just trying to hold the fort, really. So this evening, I'm going to speak briefly about a few of the issues that Ken touched on with his slides. Minister zoning orders, also known as MZOs, and the critical importance of citizen engagement if we are to protect the places that we love. So I'd like to begin with conservation authorities because that ties very much into the issue of the Pickering wetland that Ken mentioned. Ontario's conservation authorities have been around for 75 years, a fact which in and of itself speaks of legacy. 75 years for those institutions. They were established under the Conservation Authorities Act in 1946 and were a response at the time to the unhealthy state of the province's lands and waters, as a result of poor land use management practices and associated problems such as flooding, soil erosion, deforestation, pollution, and so on. Ever since, conservation authorities have been providing a regional response to these and other issues. So today, about 95% of the people living in Ontario rely on the work that's done by conservation authorities to protect our lands and waters. One of the critical roles that they play is to bring a watershed perspective to planning and development decisions. And, you know, I love that image that Ken used of the watersheds that make up the Toronto waterfront going right up to the Oak Ridges Moraine. It was a really nice slide. Anyway, among other things that they do is they have the power to regulate development and issue permits. And it's this permitting role that has been a particular target of recent regulatory and legislative changes affecting conservation authorities. That began, and my guess is many of you are very aware of it. It began with Bill 229 in December. There was such a huge outpouring of unhappiness and discontent around that bill. Honestly, I've been in Ontario Nature for 13 years. I've never seen anything like it. It was quite incredible. Anyway, people were upset because the provincial government gave itself the power to force conservation authorities, among other things, it gave itself the power to force conservation authorities to issue permits for development, even if the conservation authority believed that the activities would cause flooding or erosion or jeopardize human health and safety. On top of this, in March, so just last month, the provincial government tabled Bill 257. So if you haven't heard of that, that's another doozy. This bill, if and when it's passed, will give the government the power to issue those MZOs, Minister's Zoning Orders, to override key policies that protect natural heritage and farmland across Ontario. Of course, the government has been using MZOs for this purpose anyway, most famously for the issue that Ken mentioned, the wetland in Pickering, the Duffins Creek provincially significant wetland in Pickering. Ontario Nature, with environmental defense represented by Eco-Justice, we're taking the government to court over that particular MZO, which we consider to be unlawful. With Bill 257, however, this new bill, the government's about to change the rules. It's about to change the law after the fact, and thus to basically override our right to seek redress in the courts. It's remarkable, really, the lengths to which the government has gone to ensure that developers can destroy even the most significant natural heritage over the past year and a bit. And this is where the citizen engagement piece is so critical. So Ken already described the happy outcome for the wetland, for the Pickering wetland. And all I want to add to that is what the local citizens did. They were total champions. And if it weren't for them, we would never have seen the outcome that we saw. They gradually started, as soon as they found out about that, which was basically last November, they gradually started to raise public awareness, really fan those flames of outrage. I mean, righteous outrage, I would call it, with protests and demonstrations and online meetings and networking and webinars and letters and delegations to decision makers, lots and lots of social media, and they got a ton of press attention as well. They really did an outstanding job. And really, it's thanks to their efforts. So CBC revealed that Amazon Canada was going to be their warehouse on that wetland. Within 2 days, the company backed off because they knew how risky it would be to counter the citizens' voices. I mean, that's what I believe anyway. That a company that prides itself on its environmental record could not possibly move forward with this particular development on that site. And then shortly after that, we saw Pickering Council, as Ken described, vote unanimously to ask the minister to revoke the MZO. Again, if it hadn't been for the outrage of the citizens, of their constituents, it never would have happened. So all of that is to say, it's incredible. It was fantastic what they accomplished, but it's not unheard of. And we saw a very similar drama unfold in Stratford just a few months ago. again, there too, it was the local people who stood up. They got themselves organized and they forced the local council to retract its support for the MZO. Same deal, same kind of citizen engagement and outreach that turned the tables. And so that really is the power of the people. And it's definitely something that we need to celebrate and we need to build on and we need to foster in any way that we can. When we raise our voices together, we can make a difference. And even when we don't get the immediate results that we're seeking, and believe me, I've experienced a lot of that over the past few months where I'm not getting those results that I'm seeking. And I would say the Conservation Authority situation was a big one. Even when we lose those battles, those immediate fights, we haven't lost in terms of the bigger picture. As long as we can rally people around what matters and build awareness and lay the groundwork for a better day. So, therein lies the possibility of achieving long-term change. The long-term outcomes that we're hoping for, it is through that citizen engagement. It's we can't give up. We must continue to fight. We must continue to work together and build for the future, because it's the future that counts. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was just great. In particular, I want to thank you for spending a little time up with the Conservation Authorities, one of the great institutions in the province of Ontario, great part of our heritage, under some considerable threat right now. Also, thanks for warning folks about Bill 257, which makes even worse what came out of Bill 266 in restricting not only the conservation authorities, but also allowing MZOs and the whim of government to overcome existing law. And then finally, your thoughts on community action and its power allows me to introduce our final speaker and with that kind of fanfare. And now we'll go to Suzanne.
Thanks, David. I was trying to remain calm through this whole thing, and I was fine until Anne got started. Now I'm just thinking, yes, it's been a very difficult year. And but I have to say at the top, one of the great things about civic engagement is, what Jane Jacobs talked about, is that volunteering is not only a moral imperative, but you meet great people. And it's been true throughout these campaigns. I have 4 quick stories that I wanted to talk about as far as civic engagement or community activation. And I should tell you that I'm sitting in Prince Edward County, where I've been for quite some time. And we literally, got this campaign for the Foundry. You can do it anywhere thanks to the internet. But I just wanted to let you know that I normally would be in the St. Lawrence, and I chair the Heritage Committee as well as the Development Committee. And so part of our mantra here in the St. Lawrence is that heritage does matter, and it should be embraced and not erased. And so for me, oftentimes there's nothing like a crisis to get people together. However, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Heritage Conservation District for people who are thinking of doing a district in their area. The St. Lawrence neighborhood is part of the town of York, which is where the city of Toronto started. It's the birthplace. And I was surprised when I moved to the city that there is no designation here. Unlike Montreal or Quebec City or Ottawa, Toronto or the town of York did not have this designation. So although not a crisis, I started this in 2005 and started hounding Pam McConnell, who is then my counselor. And it wasn't until City Council approved this in 2015 that we actually had a Heritage Conservation District for the St. Lawrence. Of course, it went to the OMB, it was under appeal, and to this day, we are still sorting out the details. For us in the St. Lawrence, we look at heritage and the Heritage Conservation District as a way to tell the story of what was here before all of us were born. However, some developer folks think that we see this as a way of being NIMBY or a tool to halt or curb development. So in the St. Lawrence, we embrace development. We're not NIMBY, and we get it as long as it's in context with the neighborhood. We know that heritage can be incorporated, and we've got some great examples at the TELUS Center with Kerner Hall, our own 51 division just down the street with the police, and around the corner just from Enoch Turner Schoolhouse, and of course the Distillery District. We are fans of preserving heritage, but not the facades. We think that there's a lot of things that can be done. So the Heritage Conservation District, for those of you who are thinking of doing this, you just require a lot of patience and persistence, and you will get there. But I guess when I heard David's comments opening up, I thought, well, then I guess I do have to sort of get into the weeds a little bit and talk about this particular government and its misuse of power. I've always believed that when you're trying to make change of any kind, that you want to be inside the tent. It's way better. But this particular provincial tent seems to be the biggest tent I've ever seen. And they will not let anybody into the tent. Not the people, not me, that's for sure. So 3 quick stories and then I'll hand it back. One is Ontario Place. So in December of 2018, I was sitting at a dining room table in Parkdale, and beside me was Ken Greenberg. And we said, well, we think Ontario Place is next up, so we need to get going. And that's where we started Ontario Place for All. It's always better to have these discussions inside the tent, but again, this government does not want to engage. Letters have been sent. We've offered tours and done everything we can. So finally, January 12th of 2019, which seems like so long ago, we held a rally at Metro Hall in Toronto. It was standing room only. We had lots of media coverage, and it was still one more way to try to engage the province. Right up until today, we even sent a letter congratulating Mark Saunders on his latest appointment for the advisor for Ontario Place, and still no response from this province. There is a small win here, though, and I just wanted to tell you that we have moved the needle. So as Ken touched on at the beginning, when the first Minister for Heritage who inherited this said it was absolutely disgusting, deplorable, it should all be just razed, we then decided that we needed to get a campaign. And of course, Adam Vaughan says you can't run a campaign without a button. So we got our buttons up and running and out. We had petitions going. We had letters being sent off through all of the MPPs throughout the province to talk about the need to keep this space. Now, the government has changed their rhetoric, and they are going to be preserving the pods and the Cinesphere. They are keeping Trillium Park and the Davis Trail, although originally they said all of this needs to go. Of course, we're still waiting on the actual development proposal. And yes, the fight continues. But it's how we got mobilized to get groups together, to start the group, hold the rally, and get lots of media coverage. And we were very lucky because they were so helpful in telling the story. The next campaign is about to start, and that is our first Parliament site. So in Toronto, there is a spot of land, which again is near the Enoch Turner School, and it's on Parliament Street, Front Street, Berkeley, and the Parliament Park. And for decades, the city have been working on trying to find a way to get the land back. So again, another story, decades long, like the Heritage Conservation District. So this is a recent story, and I've learned when working on some of these projects that recent can take decades. And what happened was in 2012, the city of Toronto was able to obtain this site back from some private ownership. And so it was the actual physical land swap that we were able to acquire the first Parliament site, along with the corner portion that is owned by the Ontario Heritage Trust. And so what happened then, the city started working with the community on a master plan and heritage interpretation. When the government announced that the Ontario line was coming, it was then we were told that the Staples site, which is immediately across the street on Front Street, would be the actual site for the Corktown station. No problem. And then the government said, we would like to use the first Parliament site as a staging area for the construction. No problem, because we're still working on our master plan and heritage interpretation. We want to get it right. Then they said, well, now we think that we'd like to do tunnel boring. So we're going to use the first Parliament site for that staging, as well as the tunnel boring. Now that's another issue because we have all of the artifacts that are there that we need to do a proper archaeological dig. Then the story has changed. Now we don't want the first Parliament site just for staging and construction. We would now like this in perpetuity. So Metrolinx has announced that even though they don't have a plan for what's going to happen after the supposed Ontario line is built, they want to have this land in perpetuity in sale of purchase complete by August of this year. So I'll just say that April 15th, there was a town hall meeting. You're more than welcome to attend. And that discussion will begin on how we need to work with Metrolinx to make sure they understand the situation and that we have a plan. And it's not just about NIMBY, but it's about a way to commemorate and preserve and celebrate the first Parliament site. Next up is the Foundry, which Ken and Shirley have talked about. And so, yes, it's true. On January 14th, I was sitting at my computer and the emails started coming in from my neighbors who live over at 120 Bayview. And they said, aha, somebody's just walked onto the site. And this crew has said their mandate is to demolish, to raise the site completely and to have it shovel ready by the end of March. So immediately we get on the phones. We're starting to phone everybody from City Hall, trying to find out what's going on. Nobody knows anything. By 10 o'clock that night, I went to my Facebook page and I started Friends of the Foundry. I figure who knows what's going to happen next. But in the meantime, I wanted to back up and tell you that when the MZOs came out in October, of which West Don Lands received 3, this one with the Foundry had no plan. It just said, we're going to look at 3 buildings, 34, 43, and 18. And that's about it. No other details. Don't know who the developer is. We know nothing. So then this group called Respect Local Planning started immediately in October. So what we did was Friends of the Foundry then became an arm of Respect Local Planning. The only way we could stop this was to get lawyers. We had to get this into the courts immediately. It took us 4 days to find lawyers because all the lawyers we approached were either engaged with the province or about to, and there was a conflict. So finally, from Toronto through Guelph and London, we picked up our legal team and off we went. We spent all-nighters like I've never done before, even from my time in university. We were writing affidavits, writing letters, getting these lawyers up and running. We filed the injunction to stop. And we were able to do that in January 25th. And then we had a court hearing. We got the decision on the 29th to then hold everything until we get our court date, which was February 26th. In the meantime, we are spinning plates like crazy. We are a community group, and it was the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association that took on the charge to retain the lawyers. No disrespect to lawyers, but they don't work for free. So then we had to go into fundraising mode, and within days, if not weeks, we were able to get a petition going where we had over 23,000 signatures. We had 1,500 letters go out to the various ministers attached to this, and we'd raised $35,000. So now people are asking, well, what's happening? Well, the court case that was scheduled for February 26th was adjourned because now we are in negotiations and trying to settle. In the meantime, the government has been changing their dial, and I think that we helped do that. On a Saturday night, I emailed my friend yet again, Ken Greenberg, and I said, okay, we put our finger in the dike and we've stopped the demolition. But in the meantime, how can we get the province to think about something else? And could we just then turn for a moment and dream about what could be possible? And to give them some options. And there are other groups that are already working out there. So what happened, he turned to Shirley, and by Monday night, we had 15 people sitting around a Zoom call. And then we came up with this, what we call a discussion or a visioning exercise on what could be. I've never been involved in a campaign where we've had to mobilize so quickly, fundraise, get petitions, and again, turn to the media and ask them to help us tell our story. The media oftentimes have been wonderful at explaining how this has been going on. We then had to hold off and do the best that we could because the city could not act. The city needs to go to city council to get a motion to then instruct the city solicitor. So it was then February 4th that the city was then able to join our cause. But I have to say, it's been very enlightening. It's been very disappointing because I think that the government needs to understand, we understand development and we get this. But to sit there and not talk to us and then turn around and slowly turn the dial and say, oh, now we're going to have community consultation. So in fact, what happened was 3 neighborhood groups were invited to meet with provincial staff And at the meeting, they said, we are only here to listen. Now, I know of no consultation, and I'm firstborn. I like to discuss and talk about everything and to have the dialogue be two-way. So again, we did our 1 hour presentation. We have not heard anything. The open consultation website has been closed. And I think the point that we want to make here, it's really important, is that we're good people. We get development. We've been very collegial at striking this Foundry campaign. We started a walking club, so not just a demonstration, but to walk around, be physically distanced, and also just to reiterate that we understand this idea about affordable housing. St. Lawrence is also a member of the West Don Lands, and we're very proud of the fact that we push for 30%. And at no time have we ever said you have to forfeit affordable housing for heritage. They are not mutually exclusive. And I think the point that we're making here is that you can have both. And I'll stop right now. Otherwise, I'll just keep going on and on.
Suzanne, thank you very much, Suzanne. I've been involved, and many of us have, involved in community action events that you're describing. But that's as good a description of the anatomy of how it works as I've heard. So thank you very, very much. Now, there are questions I'm sure you have of one another and the presentations that you heard. I have one question for all of you. And then I think I might be going to questions from the chat box, because we now have, you've generated over a dozen questions or so. But it seemed to me that the pandemic that we've now been experiencing for some time had to have changed much of what you were all doing before and as you're engaged in it now. And I wondered if you have any perspective on what you think the pandemic has brought, what change the pandemic has brought, and what consequences there may well be in your sphere of activity. Can anybody take that on? Ken, please.
David, I'll make a specific reference and just expand on the point I made about Ontario Place. I think one of the things we've learned from the pandemic, which is not going to go away in my view, is the extraordinary importance of public space in a densely populated city like Toronto, and one that is becoming more and more populated. And the value of public things, public land, public places where people can be for free. They don't have to pay admission. And the fact that, and I'm going to take you back to your waterfront days for a moment, but along the Lake Ontario shoreline from Humber Bay over to the Central Harbor and extending out to the beach, we have this remarkable piece of land, 130 some odd acres, called Ontario Place, which is, as Eb Zeidler, and I deliberately use that image where he called it a public park, designed it as a public park. And when the province came along and made that statement, and let's be clear, they may have, as Suzanne suggested, acknowledged that some of the artifacts have to be saved, but the idea that it remains essentially a public place is not clear. It has not been one. It's being treated as a piece of real estate that needs to be monetized. So to your question, I think one of the learnings from COVID is the extraordinary importance of public space, the way we are all using public space now. And that goes deeply to the questions of social equity, which we talk a great deal about now, and who our city is for, what our citizens need, what are their requirements. And so that also touches, and I'm going to connect this to Anne, the natural heritage, all the way from our provincial parks through our ravines, to our watersheds, our trails, the ability of people to use those and not just think of the conservation authorities in a narrow sense as mitigating flooding, but actually providing this great cultural resource.
Thanks, Ken. Would anyone else like comment? Anne, did you want to comment on that?
Everything I was going to say, Ken said it. He's right
Okay.
on. I mean, honestly, what we really understand from COVID is the importance of public spaces, and as part of that, the importance of natural spaces. and how critical they are to our health, whether we're talking about physical, mental, social, spiritual health. These places are important, and we need places that we can get out and be in nature and have access. So absolutely.
I understand that the medical doctors are now offering green prescriptions.
Yeah.
At any rate, Shirley, you have a thought?
Yes, I do. Thanks. I completely agree with Ken and Anne. The wonderful thing about the pandemic is that it's been a timeout for everybody pretty well on the planet. We've all been sent to our rooms and told to have a rethink, which we deserved. And I think that, as Ken said, all these issues of climate change, social equity, migration, everything is, it's brought everything into sharp relief, and the social movements like Black Lives Matter have come back into focus in a very important way. And one other thing I think that it has highlighted is the inadequacy of our built environment, and in particular affordable housing. And it's no accident that the neighborhoods that are most afflicted have the worst housing conditions, overcrowding and inadequate housing. So it has been for quite a while a global crisis, but I think the pandemic has certainly sort of put extra emphasis on how important it is that we provide housing. It's a basic human right for people.
Thanks, Shirley. I think now we've got about a half an hour left, somewhere around there. And we have upwards now almost to 24 questions. So I think what I'll do is ask Mariah to start the questions, and we'll take as many of them as we can. So Mariah, I'm leaving it to you to bring forward the questions. I think that's right.
Yes. And I think this one relates very closely to the conversation about the importance of green space, and is geared really at Ken. Is the mandate of Future of Ontario Place or Ontario Place for All to act like a friends group to advocate for it against an inevitable development plan from the province? I'm thinking of the success of groups like the Friends of Fort York and Friends of the Foundry.
Yeah.
So let me start by saying, to put this in a broader context, 3 of the 4 examples that I started with in my opening presentation and we've talked about are still in jeopardy, including Ontario Place, the Foundry, and the Greenbelt with Highway 413. And as Suzanne pointed out, we have not had an answer. We've not had any response at all on Ontario Place. And I think there's a really fundamental principle at stake, which is about the importance of Ontario Place as a public place, as a piece of public land, as a valuable public asset. And I think the only way we're going to win that battle is the same way that the battle around the wetlands in Pickering was won, and that is massive public pressure. It will have to make it clear that a huge number of constituents, voters, actually care about Ontario Place and want to see it saved, not just to save a few artifacts and then go ahead and turn it into some kind of theme park, something you can put a fence around and charge admission, but keep it as a great public space, which is part of the network of waterfront public spaces. And it was very telling that the minister said, when he made that initial statement about Ontario Place was a disgrace and had to be demolished, he made a point of saying it's not a waterfront place, which when you think about it is, I have no words. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
Thanks, Ken. Next question, Mariah.
Heritage is now defined much more broadly than it was, for instance, in the 1960s. Do our panelists think Toronto is now finding the right balance between growth and preservation?
Wow. Anybody want to pick that up?
I
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
One of the things that I'm frustrated with is I don't think so. And I think it's frustrating that we had to go through the Foundry exercise, that the citizens had to mobilize and get into the courts to stop this demolition of this heritage site. To me, that's just not good city building. And I guess just to, take a little corner here, my frustration with this government is that they are not for the people. I hear the words, but their behavior is quite different. And it is very frustrating. I think that, David, you were talking earlier about, under COVID, and what irks me more than anything is to take advantage of the citizens of Ontario and to start sliding through some of this legislation. It to me is smarmy at best. When people are not, they're having to deal with things that they've never had to deal before. And I think that COVID has amplified or accelerated all of our issues that we need to do better. And for this government to come in, the number of MZOs that have been executed since this government have come into place is just outrageous. And so for me, it's almost like, I have to wear these silver bullets bracelets to hold off this government, because every time you turn around, there is something else. And I think it's very disheartening that it's the community that has to rally to scream at this government to say, stop it. And to me, that's just not how you build. It is deficit-based, and it's very frustrating, and it just seems that it will not end. So you've got, for example, with the Foundry, when you ask Minister Clark, you ask him about the deal, there is no deal. Yet 20 minutes later, the Premier says, well, we're in negotiations, it's confidential, and once we find out, we'll be totally transparent. So I'm very frustrated. Okay, yes, I am a lot frustrated, because I just think that when they say they are for the people, I find them so insulting. I'm used to working with people. I think it's way better to be working, but they are just not answering any of our calls, letters, anything for any of these campaigns. So it's very, very disheartening.
I don't know if anybody else wants to respond to the question, but historically in Toronto, it's always been a battle. It's not new. For a long, long time, we paid no attention to heritage. It's certainly in the 50s and early 60s not. I think the great book that sort of started it off for many of us was Eric Arthur's book, No Mean City. And that at least said, you've got something to be proud of, do something about it. But it was always a struggle between community action and trying to figure out what you preserve. I think the saving of the old City Hall, which most people would find it unbelievable that you would tear down the old City Hall, that was an active proposal and was heading for actuality in the mid and late 60s. So it's always been a struggle, and that's why, for me at any rate, it turned out to be a struggle between people and communities who were not experts in the field, finding and being able to touch hands with people who were, whether that was natural heritage or built heritage or cultural heritage. And therefore, that's the combination you need in order to get it done. So let me go to another question, Mariah.
So there are lots of attendees in the chat asking questions around kind of what they can do to be involved. I think a lot of them are summed up by asking, what do the panelists think is the single most effective planning tool citizens can use to push back?
Suzanne, I'll have to ask you. What you might want to do is to give Suzanne your number. Of course, you'll never have a private life after that.
I think that with planning, in our municipality in the city of Toronto, with our development committee, we have a really good relationship with the community planners. And we've made it clear that we want to work with developers. And I think it's way better for them to talk to you before their applications go into the city. I think that we've got a track record working with developers where they've actually said we have a better development now after community consultation than when we first came out. The citizens or the communities, they know their neighborhoods. And you can get the right mix. And we've had such great, stunning working groups that have been collaborative, and we've done some great projects. David, one example that we often talk about is a building that you used to live in. And we're very proud of that proponent, because they've actually said, and their architect said, we've got a better building now after talking to the community when we first started out. I think it's much better, because I think that, you know, they used to have these community consultations where, this is all, of course, pre-COVID, where you'd all come in and line up the hall with your pitchforks and be screaming and yelling. But that gets you nothing. It is so much better to have the conversation with the developer in your community and let them know what your needs are. But at the same time, we can't say no development. This is, you know, whether, I'm not sure where everyone is, but you're living in an area where there is going to be development. And in our area, I'll tell you right now, we grade our developers. We give them grades from A+ all the way down to F-.
Ken?
Yeah, David, let me say, I think, and this doesn't apply to every single case, but it applies to many, and that is not just to say no, but say what you're for.
Right.
And so the idea of doing what we used to call counter proposals, like the great work that we did with Shirley's firm, KPMB, on the Foundry, and the competition that I mentioned that the World Monuments Fund and the Daniels Faculty and the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario and Ontario Place for All held for Ontario Place. If you can show great ideas and show how things could work better, you're in a much stronger position. And I don't think anything else can galvanize public opinion in quite that way. And I think those magnificent images that we were able to come up with for the Foundry, to show Foundry Lane and to show that public space, really caught people's imagination. And they were able to say, yes, it's not either or, it's both and. And you can do that convincingly. And I think there are a lot of professionals, whether it's, you know, in the field of ecology, when we're dealing with the natural environment, architects, landscape architects, engineers, all kinds of people who are more than willing to actually contribute their time and talents to work with community activists like Suzanne or others to actually demonstrate the art of the possible.
Thanks, Ken. Next question.
Bouncing off Ken bringing up the Foundry proposal. So question probably for Ken and Shirley. What is the status of this proposal that Shirley described in such detail, and is it still a possibility?
Suzanne, you probably are the best to answer that.
So here's the thing. So this was a visioning exercise. So it was a demonstration of what could be. And we again, there is no conversation with the government. We still don't know who the potential owner is. We know nothing more. And so it's been very difficult. Again, we're outside the tent. So all I can say is that Friends of the Foundry had one mandate, and that was to stop the demolition. And that was achieved. So that was a pretty huge goal. Yeah. But now we're in a holding pattern. And so the lawyers for the province, the city, and the St. Lawrence Neighborhood Association are still working on a settlement agreement. I should add, just in case anybody's walking by, the province did serve notice that they are going in. The team is back in to do a proper removal of asbestos and to keep the building that was partially demolished. They're going in to preserve it so it's protected from the elements. So for me, that's a good sign. It means, okay, they're in the game. I think we've changed the channel. If they were adamant about doing the total demolition, they would just let it sit there derelict. So the fact that they're going in to protect it from the elements is a good sign. But after that, again, still no conversation.
Thank you. Next question, Mariah.
I think you'll all be very happy to hear that there are many compliments in the chat for the Foundry proposal. This question is for Anne. Can you speak to the 7-generation concept as it relates to both natural and built heritage?
I'll do my best. So the 7th-generation concept is such a powerful concept, and one honestly that challenges the way mainstream society does things, because we organize ourselves on such a short term with such short-term horizons, and we don't think about what we're leaving for the future. And so I think it's very important I can't really speak to built heritage, but I can speak to natural heritage. It's very, very important. It really, it's an antidote to greed. It's an antidote to selfishness. We're in the throes of a mass extinction, the 6th great extinction. And what does that mean in terms of future generations? What does that mean 7 generations down the road? I would say even 1 generation down the road. What does that mean in terms of the experiences that people can have, in terms of the natural wealth and richness of the world? What's going to be left? Not very much at all. So that concept of 7 generations it really points to responsibility. It points to thinking beyond ourselves and to responsibility. It forces us to ask, what are we taking right now, and what are we leaving for the future, and how can we be good ancestors? So I think it's a very, very powerful concept, and I wish that something like that could be part of the way that the decisions are made in society.
That's a good for you, and that it always struck me when I heard that people were connecting the 7th generation, which is a very old Iroquoian understanding of the way of life, connecting that with modern understanding of ecology. It struck me that that's not a bad example of how we connect Indigenous understanding of life and our own. Well done, thank you. Next one, Mariah.
Perhaps a good follow-up to that for all panelists. If heritage is defined as our collective cultural and natural inheritance, how can we best teach our children and future generations to embrace it and help it thrive? Or perhaps what tools can we use to teach future generations?
Is that for you, Ken, or who is that for?
Do
you want to take another shot? Anne or Ken?
I'll start by saying something, and I'm sure the other panelists will as well. To me, the city itself is a story. When I walk around the city, and I have to say, my wife and I are doing a lot of walking around the city these days, we are basically reading the city as a story. We're reading those 7 generations in the environment that we see. We are reading the layers, and we're seeing a trajectory of which we get a chance to touch one small piece, knowing that others will pick it up after us, and many others came before. And having that innate sense, that 7-generation sense, in a tangible form in front of you, in front of your eyes, so that you can see it and read it. And part of it's reading plaques that describe the history, but part of it is just literally seeing what's there in front of your eyes. And I hate the term awesome. We're always saying that things are awesome. That is awesome. That is truly that merits that description. And I think taking kids, going back to our children, and teaching them to read the city in the way that Indigenous people may have taught their children before all of us people from elsewhere got here to read the land, is an extremely important skill. So I'll just end with this final thing. We live on a park, Victoria Memorial Square, and its lives include the fact that it was the burial ground for Fort York. going back to 1793, before which it was a natural piece of land on the Garrison Creek. In 1830, when the city expanded westward, it became part of something called Wellington Place. It has gone through many lives since. And when you stand in that space, and we have people coming all the time to tell those stories to each other, including a monument to the War of 1812, the fact that there was a black regiment that had something to do with this neighborhood because they worked on the railways. So it's the telling of all those stories through the city. And that's why something like the Foundry is so important. The fact that they made wheels for trains that took people across the country. So it's not just a wonderful set of buildings, it's the not only the embodied energy, but the embodied stories in our heritage, which I think are so valuable.
I just wanted to add to that. I think that, you know, when I'm hiking in Europe, I can't imagine anywhere in Europe having this discussion about the Foundry. And I'm not going to tell this story well, Shirley will know this better, but the architects who just won an award, because their mantra is never, ever, ever tear down heritage, but you need to embrace it and wrap new development around it. And so I worry about, you know, I'll be dead by the time we get our heritage district plan. But the idea is all of these heritage artifacts, whether they're built form or natural, they tell the story about where we've been. And so 100 years from now, when people are walking around over my grave or my ashes, they're going to see, I hope still, the St. Lawrence Hall. I hope still the Foundry. And it shouldn't be seen as either or. It should be both. Because when we're dealing with developers now, they have no problem coming in and talking to us about, well, this particular era, you know, we need to save. Well, we can save it all. And also, I just want to be clear, it's just because a built form is old doesn't necessarily mean it has heritage attributes. But I think we need to be more mindful, because otherwise it's those artifacts that we hold on to that help tell the story. And this is the problem we're going to have right now with the First Parliament site. We've got the stories, we've got the burnt embers in the ground, but we don't have a building. And so the buildings help tell the story, but we do need to have that. I'm still smacked, I'm still gobsmacked when I moved to Toronto that the St. Lawrence, okay, it doesn't have to be that, but the town of York is not a designated heritage conservation district. Hello, Montreal, Quebec City, Ottawa. This should be a no-brainer. So I don't understand, because I'm new to the city, I'm just a young'un, but I don't understand why we plowed everything over. And when I look back and to see what was, it just is very sad to see what we've lost. We just can't afford to lose anything more.
Hey, Shirley, thank you. Shirley?
Thanks. I just wanted to add about natural heritage. You know, sometimes it takes somebody from afar to make you realize what an extraordinary gift we have in terms of natural heritage in the city. When we competed for the master plan for Downsview, we are working with wonderful landscape architects from Copenhagen. Copenhagen's a pretty nice city, which we all admire. And I remember we were going up in a bus to the Downsview lands, and I was sitting next to the landscape architect, and going through the neighborhoods, he said, his jaw dropped open, and he said, I've never seen anything like this. You live in the forest. I said, you're absolutely right. And then he got onto the ravines.
Yeah.
So we have an extraordinary natural heritage. So in answer to, this is a bit like Ken's suggestion, in answer to the person who asked what to do about the next generation, take them walking. That's what my parents did with me. It's the best thing. And both the built environment and the natural environment. We're very fortunate.
Good for you. That was really good, Shirley. But one factoid, there are 300 kilometers of ravines in the city of Toronto alone.
It's amazing.
It's extraordinary. It's an old cliche that most of you would remember, but others may not have heard it. And that is that I think it was Hugh Hood who once said that the ravines in Toronto are like the canals in Venice.
Yeah.
And it's something that totally undernourished and underappreciated for many years, but now beginning to get a little more appreciated. Next question, if we could.
I'm loving seeing in the chat everyone echoing that you're all heritage heroes. Next question in relation to the first Parliament site. Is it harder to get community support because there aren't any buildings? The heritage is below ground. Is that a challenge?
Yep, it's a challenge because you're right. People are walking by and saying, what's to save? It's a car wash. Again, unless you've got the bricks and mortar, it's difficult. But we are then educating people that we've been working on this heritage interpretation and this master plan. There was a meeting coming up April 15th where Some Kwan from the city will be giving an update. It's very difficult. And unlike the Foundry, we have no legal recourse. Zippo. So the best we can do is to be our charming selves and to get Metrolinx to the table to have the discussion. And some people may say, well, really, do we need it? Well, we don't know what's underneath there. ASI, Ron Williamson did some trenching a while back. We need to go back in and discover. And quite frankly, this is a terrible thing to say. I'll just say that we look forward to the opportunity of working with Metrolinx to see how we can come through this together. I think there is a lot of common ground. And again, I'm a big fan of getting to yes. So I don't want to sit there and say, no, 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 get out of here. But I would like to at least have a compelling reason as to why they have to have this land in perpetuity. Anyway, it is going to be a struggle. But again, if you're curious or interested, please come out April 15th.
Good, well done. Next.
Perhaps a challenging question, but is all cultural and natural heritage good?
David, let me start that. And depends what you mean by good, but I'm going to give you the example of Joe Riley, who was the mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, and brilliant mayor. He was mayor, I don't know, for decades. Yeah. And Joe Riley insisted that throughout Charleston, all of the slave markets actually be identified and done so in a way that people knew about the atrocities that had happened there. And so I think it's not just happy stories, but it's also painful stories. Mm-hmm. For those of you who have visited Berlin or German cities, you will see in the sidewalk a commemoration of the people who lived in some of the buildings and some of the houses who were shipped off to the concentration camps. I think there are many in our own country, if I put that in the context of what we did to indigenous peoples or what the various injustices that have happened, I think it's really important that we not erase all of that history, and we remember those things as well as celebrating all of the wonderful and positive things.
Yeah, I think Ken, someone might want to speak to it, but there's no doubt Ken speaks for everybody in this panel and anybody I would know who takes an interest in these matters. Indeed, I think you have to work a little harder when it comes to to trying to remember the narratives that are not kind to you and not part of a happy story. You have to work a little harder because they tell perhaps even deeper truths than happy stories. Yep. But at any rate, well put, Ken. I think we have time for a couple more questions. We're now up to 40 questions. I wish, well, we at least got an inquisitive audience. So is there a couple more questions here, Mariah?
Yes, and we have one that might actually be a great to end on and have thoughts from all of the panelists. But does community action actually have the power to affect real and permanent change, or does it simply delay?
Who wants to start? Anne, go ahead.
Sure. I would say absolutely it has the capacity for real and permanent change. you know, it was interesting the comment about City Hall, because I grew up in Stratford and we had the same fight growing up. And I was so happy at the end of I mean, it completely divided the city about whether or not we were going to keep our old City Hall or have a new one. And at the end of the day, we decided to have that old City Hall. I can't imagine it being torn down in the future. I suppose that battle might have to be fought again. But, you know, it's tough. Organizations like Ontario Nature, we worked for decades to get strong policy to protect wetlands, and we've got really good, strong policy. So I'm inclined to say, yeah, look at how long we've come. Look how far we've come along, and yet then you have these MZOs coming, and it undoes things. So I think one of the things we're never going to be there where we can be comfortable and say we've done it. I don't think we'll ever be at that point. I think every generation has to pick up the mantle and continue the fights to protect things. I think that's always going to be ongoing, but I think we can protect things and protect them for the long term and make that progress, as long as we always have the generations who will come behind and say this matters, and we need to make sure that it continues. And I guess again, that's all about that cross-generational thinking, right? That you have elders, and I love the way in Indigenous society where elders are properly respected for what they bring to the table.
Here, here.
But you have elders who pass things on, and they help to prepare the generations that come. And that conversation across generations is so important. And then people understand why things matter. They matter for this reason, and then they can pick up that mantle and carry on.
So David,
Good for
I'm
you. Good for you.
going to jump in, and some of these points have been made already, but I will remind you that when I started to work for you when you were mayor, the Union Station, St. Lawrence Market, and Old City Hall were all slated for demolition.
Yeah.
But it wasn't only those
Right.
individual buildings. Neighborhood after neighborhood was slated for demolition through urban renewal.
Mhm.
And heritage wasn't the only issue, but a big part of what got the Reform Council elected and got you elected as mayor, in fact, was a changing perception about the value of heritage. And that ended up shaking the earth at that point and changing the composition of the council, and led to massive change in the way the city thought about itself. We're in a moment of unfortunate backsliding, which I think is, you know, what has brought us to this conversation this evening. But I want to go back to my first point. It's that stewardship that rests in the communities, which transcends elections and political administrations, and has that deep and abiding commitment to things that matter. That, you know, if I want to end up this conversation with some optimism, because I think it does ultimately hold sway in many cases.
Mhm.
Thanks very much. Shirley, can I leave the last word with you?
Sure, thank you. So I would say categorically that civic action is one of the few things that does bring permanent change. Given that politics is such a short-term game, I just want to tell the story about FDR when, of course, the United States was in such a deep depression, and civil society groups from Chicago came to visit with him and basically suggested a lot of the elements that became the New Deal as things that he could do. And apparently he said, I agree with you. Now go out there and make me do this. That's why we need civil action.
Great line. That's a great line. Good for you. Thank you. Thanks for that. And let me thank all of you for joining as guests tonight. It was a great discussion. Really appreciate it. I'm going to say to the audience as well, I hope you'll join us on the 21st. I think I'm finished when we can talk about education and the influence of the pandemic on it. So thanks to all of you. Did I
Thank you.
go over time? Okay, thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
David.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye,
Thanks,
thanks.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Well,
Bye-bye.